The judge's gavel came down like a sledgehammer on my coffin, and I watched my wife Clarissa's lips curl into that perfect smile she'd practiced in 1,000 mirrors, the same smile that had fooled me for 22 years. "You'll die alone and broke, Jimmy," she whispered just loud enough for the courtroom to hear, her manicured fingers already reaching for the penthouse keys. "Just like you deserve." My name is James Tate, and I used to think I was one of the good guys. Used to think hard work, loyalty, and playing by the rules meant something in this world. Turns out, I was just another sucker in a game I didn't even know I was playing. The courtroom in Glacier Heights, Montana, felt like a mausoleum, all cold marble and judgmental stares. My daughter Lila sat behind Clarissa, 18 years old, and throwing me looks that could melt steel. My son Nate, 16 and still loyal, was the only one who met my eyes with anything resembling sympathy. "Tate," Judge Morrison said, his voice echoing off the walls. "The court awards Mrs. Clarissa Tate full custody of the minor child, the penthouse property valued at $6.8 million, and 70% of all marital assets. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." 30 days. 22 years of marriage, and I got 30 days to pack up my life and disappear. Clarissa stood up, smoothing her $1,000 suit. She'd always been beautiful, sharp cheekbones, ice blue eyes, the kind of legs that made men forget their own names. But now I could see what I'd been blind to for decades. The coldness behind those eyes, the calculation in every gesture. "Come along, children," she said to Lila and Nate. "We're going home, home. The penthouse I'd built with my own hands, using money from the construction company I'd started with nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox. The glass and marble masterpiece that looked down on the valley like a crown jewel, now hers by court order." Lila jumped up eagerly, but Nate hesitated. "Dad, where are you going to live?" Before I could answer, Clarissa's mother, Lenore, stepped forward. At 62, she was still striking in that predatory way some women never lose. She'd taught Clarissa everything she knew about manipulating men, and she wore that accomplishment like a badge of honor. "Don't worry about your father, Nathan," Lenore said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I'm sure he'll figure something out. The Evers women always land on their feet. Can't say the same for the men who disappoint us." The Evers women. That's how they referred to themselves, like some kind of dynasty instead of what they really were. Professional heartbreakers with law degrees. I watched my family walk away, Clarissa's heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown timer. The lawyer she'd hired, some shark from Billings, packed up his briefcase with the satisfied air of a man who'd just made his monthly payment on a yacht. My own lawyer, a local guy named Pete, who specialized in DUIs and property disputes, patted my shoulder awkwardly. "I'm sorry, Jimmy. She had better evidence, better witnesses. That affair timeline really hurt us." A fair timeline. 3 months of my wife screwing Scott Vaughn, the local real estate broker, who'd peaked in high school and never gotten over it. 3 months of her lying to my face while she planned my destruction. "Yeah, well," I said, standing up and straightening my only decent suit. "Life's full of surprises." The abandoned Tate farmhouse sat on 40 acres of overgrown fields about 10 miles outside town. It had belonged to my father and his father before him, back when the Tate name meant something in Glacier Heights. Now it was just a creaking monument to better times, with a leaky roof and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. I pulled my truck into the weed-choked driveway and sat there for a minute, looking at the place that would be my home for the foreseeable future. The paint was peeling, the front porch sagged, and half the shutters hung at drunken angles. But it was mine, free and clear, and Clarissa's lawyers couldn't touch it. The inside smelled like dust and disappointment. Furniture covered in white sheets, family photos turned face down, the ghost of my father's pipe tobacco still lingering in the air 5 years after his funeral. I'd avoided this place since he died. Too busy building my empire to deal with the past. Now the past was all I had left. I spent the first week drinking beer and feeling sorry for myself. The second week, I started making repairs, partly to keep busy, partly because the alternative was putting a tool in my mouth. The third week, I was tearing down a wall in what used to be my father's study when I found something that changed everything. The sledgehammer went through the drywall like it was paper, revealing a space that shouldn't have existed according to the house's blueprints. Behind the wall was a small room, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with a steel safe sitting in the corner like it had been waiting for me. On top of the safe was an envelope with my name written in my father's careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Jimmy, if you're reading this, everything I planned has worked. The Evers women destroyed me just like they're destroying you, but I was smarter than they gave me credit for. Open the safe. The combination is your mother's birthday. Use what's inside or die a fool like I almost did, Dad. My mother's birthday. I hadn't thought about that date in years, but muscle memory guided my fingers. Or 1952. The safe opened with a soft click that sounded like a crack of thunder in the silence. Inside was a leather journal, stack of photographs, several cassette tapes, and a manila folder thick with documents. I pulled out the journal first, my father's handwriting filling page after page with dates, names, and details that made my blood run cold. The first entry was dated 25 years ago. Lenore Evers is not what she seems. Neither is her daughter. They're hunters, and men like us are their prey. I've been gathering evidence for months, but it might be too late for me. If something happens, if I lose everything like the others, maybe Jimmy can use this to fight back. I read until dawn, my father's words painting a picture of a conspiracy that stretched back decades. The Evers women didn't just break hearts, they destroyed lives with surgical precision. Lenore had done it to 5 men before my father, always the same pattern. Seduction, marriage, manipulation, and finally, complete financial ruin. And now Clarissa was carrying on the family tradition. The photographs were the smoking tool. Images of Lenore with various men over the years, some in compromising positions, others showing her stealing documents or planting evidence. The cassette tapes contained recorded conversations, including one where Lenore coached a young Clarissa on how to handle men like me. Make them think they're in control, Lenore's voice crackled from the old tape player. Let them build something, then take it away piece by piece. By the time they realize what's happening, it's too late. I sat in that dusty farmhouse as the sun came up, surrounded by evidence of a generational scheme that had claimed my father and was now claiming me. But unlike him, I wasn't going to go quietly. If Clarissa wanted a villain, I'd give her one. The Outlaw's Bar and Grill sat on the wrong side of Glacier Heights, like a neon-lit middle finger pointed at the fancy ski lodges and boutique hotels. It was the kind of place where loggers and ranch hands came to drink away their problems, where the jukebox played Hank Williams and the pool tables had seen better decades. I found Sean O'Malley in his usual spot at the end of the bar, nursing a whiskey and reading a paperback western. Everyone called him Shaggy on account of his gray hair that looked like he'd been electrocuted, but he was the best private investigator in 3 counties. Jimmy Tate, he said without looking up from his book. Heard you got wrecked in court. Sorry about that. I need your help, Shaggy. I figured you might. He closed the book and signaled the bartender for another drink. What's the job? I slid the manila folder across the bar. I need you to dig up everything you can on the Evers women. Everything. Going back as far as you can. Shaggy opened the folder and whistled low. Jesus, Jimmy. Where did you get this stuff? My father was smarter than I gave him credit for. I ordered a beer and watched him flip through the photographs. Think you can find more? In a town this size, heck, I can find out what Lenore Evers had for breakfast 20 years ago. He tucked the folder inside his jacket. But it's going to cost you. How much? $5,000, plus expenses. I didn't have $5,000, but I'd figure something out. Deal. 2 weeks later, Shaggy called me with results that made my father's evidence look like amateur hour. We met at the farmhouse after dark, and he spread his findings across the kitchen table like a prosecutor building a case. Your ex-wife is a busy woman, he said, lighting a cigarette. In the past 6 months alone, she's been involved with Scott Vaughn, Judge Morrison's court clerk, her law partner Jade Brennan, and at least 3 members of the city council. Jesus Christ. Gets better or worse, depending on your perspective. He pulled out a stack of bank records. See these deposits? Clarissa's been getting regular payments from a shell company owned by her mother. Turns out Lenore's been running a long con for decades. She identifies wealthy men, Clarissa seduces them, they get married, and then they systematically destroy the guy's finances and reputation. The bank records showed a pattern going back 15 years. Payments to Clarissa, payments to various lawyers and judges, payments to private investigators who specialized in manufacturing evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct. How many men? I asked. That I can prove, 8, including your father, but I suspect there are more. Shaggy stubbed out his cigarette. The Evers women are professionals, Jimmy. This is their business. I studied a photograph of Clarissa coming out of a motel with Scott Vaughn. They were laughing, his hand on her lower back, not a care in the world. What about Scott? Is he part of it? Nah, he's just the muscle. Dumb as a post, but good in bed according to the ladies I talked to. Clarissa's using him the same way she used you, just for different purposes. The next photograph showed Clarissa with Judge Morrison's clerk, a nervous-looking man named Bradley, who had access to all the court's files. This is how she knew what evidence to prepare, I said. Bingo. Bradley's been feeding her information for months. Probably promised him a favor if he played along. I felt something dark and cold settling in my chest. For 22 years, I thought I was married to a woman who loved me. Instead, I'd been married to a predator who was slowly draining me. There's more, Shaggy said. He pulled out a cassette tape. Recorded this last week at Jade Brennan's office, your wife and her mother planning their next move. He pressed play and Clarissa's voice filled the room. Jimmy's more stubborn than the others. He might actually fight back. Let him try, Lenore's voice replied. We've been doing this for 30 years. No man has ever beaten us, and no man ever will. By Christmas, he'll be living in a trailer park and we'll be shopping for our next target. They laughed together, the sound like breaking glass. I turned off the tape and looked at Shaggy. I want to destroy them. Figured you might feel that way. He pulled out a business card. This guy's a lawyer in Billings, specializes in fraud cases. He's expensive, but he's good. I don't have money for an expensive lawyer. Then you better get creative. Shaggy finished his drink and stood up. Because if you're going to war with the Evers women, you better bring everything you've got. After he left, I sat in the dark farmhouse, listening to the wind rattle the windows. My phone buzzed with a text from Lila. Dad, Mom says you're stalking her. Leave us alone. My own daughter turned against me by a woman who'd made destroying families her life's work. But Lila was 18 now, old enough to make her own choices. If she wanted to believe her mother's lies, that was her decision. Nate was different. He called me every few days, usually when Clarissa wasn't around. During one of those conversations, he let slip something that gave me an idea. Mom's been acting weird, he said. She and Grandma Lenore spend hours locked in the study, whispering about something. And yesterday I saw Grandma moving boxes into the basement. What kind of boxes? I don't know, but they looked heavy and old. After I hung up, I drove past the penthouse and parked across the street. The building rose 12 stories above the valley, all glass and steel and arrogance. My penthouse, my former penthouse, occupied the entire top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire county. I could see figures moving around inside, shadows against the light. Clarissa and Lenore, probably planning their next victim. The thought made me sick, but it also made me angry. And anger, I was learning, was a much more useful emotion than self-pity. I pulled out my phone and called the lawyer Shaggy had recommended. His name was Marcus Webb, and his secretary said he could see me the next morning if I was willing to drive to Billings. Tell him it's about the Evers family, I said. Tell him I have evidence. There was a pause. Mr. Webb will see you at 9 a.m. sharp. Apparently the Evers women had made enemies before. Marcus Webb's law office occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Billings. The kind of place where the coffee cost $10 and the lawyers wore suits that cost more than most people's cars. Webb himself was a small, intense man with the predatory focus of a shark who'd smelled blood in the water. The Evers women, he said, leaning back in his leather chair. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to bring me a case against them. You know about them? Know about them, Mr. Tate. They destroyed my brother-in-law 15 years ago. Took his ranch, his kids, his will to live. He put a tool in his mouth rather than face bankruptcy. Webb's eyes were cold as winter. So yes, I know about them. I spread Shaggy's evidence across his massive desk. Webb examined each document with the careful attention of a surgeon, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. This is good, he said finally. Very good, but it's not enough. What do you mean? I mean we can prove they're con artists. But we can't prove they committed any crimes that aren't past the statute of limitations. Adultery isn't illegal in Montana, and neither is being a manipulative witch. He tapped the bank records. These payments could be legitimate gifts from mother to daughter. So what do we do? Webb smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. We make them commit fresh crimes. We give them enough rope to hang themselves, and we document every inch of it. The plan he outlined was simple in concept, but complex in execution. We would make Clarissa and Lenore believe I was planning to expose them, forcing them to take illegal action to protect themselves. Webb would provide surveillance equipment and legal cover, while I played the role of a desperate ex-husband, gathering evidence. The key is making them think they're still in control, Webb explained. Let them believe they're manipulating you while we document everything they do. What if they get suspicious? They won't. You know why? Webb leaned forward. Because they've never lost before. Success breeds arrogance, and arrogance breeds mistakes. I left Billings with a briefcase full of surveillance equipment and a plan that scared the heck out of me. But fear, I was learning, was just another emotion to be managed. The first phase involved making myself visible around town, asking questions about the Evers women, and letting people know I was investigating my ex-wife. In a place like Glacier Heights, gossip traveled faster than wildfire. And I knew it would get back to Clarissa within hours. I started at the courthouse, asking the clerks about public records and making a show of copying documents. Then I visited the bank where Clarissa kept her accounts, claiming I needed information for tax purposes. I even stopped by her law office, telling the receptionist I wanted to discuss family matters with my ex-wife. Each stop was designed to send a message. Jimmy Tate was digging, and he might find something inconvenient. The response came faster than I expected. 2 days after my courthouse visit, Scott Vaughn showed up at the farmhouse. I was replacing a broken window when I heard his BMW crunching up the gravel driveway. Scott was the kind of guy who'd been handsome in high school and was still trading on those looks 20 years later. He worked out obsessively, dressed like a catalog model, and had the intellectual depth of a puddle. "Jimmy," he said, getting out of his car like he owned the place. "We need to talk." "Do we?" I kept working on the window, not bothering to look at him. "Clarissa's worried about you. She thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown." "Is that what she thinks?" Scott stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me. He was bigger than me, but I'd been swinging hammers since I was 16, and construction work builds a different kind of strength than gym workouts. "Look, I get it," he said. "Divorce is hard, but you need to move on, man. Stop bothering people with your conspiracy theories." I turned around and looked at him for the first time. Conspiracy theories? All this BS about Clarissa planning something. She's a successful lawyer, Jimmy. She doesn't need to scheme against you. You lost because you weren't good enough for her. The recording device in my shirt pocket was capturing every word. "Is that what she told you?" "She didn't need to tell me anything. I've got eyes." Scott smiled, the kind of smug expression that made me want to rearrange his face. "She's with me now because, I can give her things you never could." "Like what?" "Like a future, like passion. Like a man who doesn't spend his evenings crying into a beer bottle." I set down my tools and faced him fully. "Scott, can I ask you something?" "What?" "Do you really think you're the first?" His smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you really think you're the first guy Clarissa's screwed behind her husband's back? Do you think you're special?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." I stepped closer. "You know about Judge Morrison's clerk, right, Bradley? Sweet kid, probably thought he was in love. What about City Councilman Peterson? Or that banker from Great Falls?" Scott's face was turning red. "You're full of crap." "Am I? Why don't you ask Clarissa about them?" "Better yet, ask her mother. Lenore keeps detailed records of all her daughter's conquests." "You're lying." "Maybe. Or maybe you're just another useful idiot in a game you don't understand." I picked up my hammer and tested its weight. "Either way, I think it's time for you to leave." Scott looked at the hammer, then at my face, and apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. "This isn't over, Jimmy." "No," I agreed, "it's not." He drove away fast enough to spray gravel, and I allowed myself a small smile. Phase 1 was complete. Now I had to wait for Phase 2. It came that evening in the form of a phone call from my son. "Dad, something weird happened today," Nate said, his voice low like he was trying not to be overheard. "Mom got a call from Scott, and afterwards she and Grandma Lenore had this huge fight." "What kind of fight?" "Mom was yelling about you poisoning people against her, and Grandma was saying something about containing the situation. Then they locked themselves in the study for like 2 hours." "Perfect. The surveillance equipment Webb had given me included a device that could intercept cell phone calls within a certain range. If I could get close enough to the penthouse, I might be able to record their conversations. "Nate, I need you to do something for me," I said. "But it has to stay between us." "What is it?" "I need to know when your mother and grandmother are going to be out of the house. Can you text me their schedules?" There was a pause. "Dad, what are you planning?" "Nothing dangerous. I just need to retrieve some of my personal belongings." It was a lie, but a necessary one. Nate was a good kid, but he was still 16, and I couldn't involve him in what was coming next. "Okay," he said finally, "but be careful. Mom's been acting really paranoid lately." Paranoid was good. Paranoid people made mistakes. The text from Nate came 3 days later. "Mom and Grandma going to Billings tomorrow. Shopping and lawyer meetings. Gone all day." I parked my truck in the alley behind the penthouse building and used the service elevator to reach the top floor. The building's security was a joke, all flash and no substance, just like everything else Clarissa touched. My key still worked, which told me she hadn't bothered changing the locks. Arrogance. Just like Webb had predicted, the penthouse looked different now, redecorated to erase any trace of my presence. The furniture I'd picked out was gone, replaced with the expensive pieces that screamed money but had no soul. Family photos had been removed from the walls, leaving blank spaces like missing teeth. But I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was there to plant surveillance devices. Webb had given me equipment that looked like electrical outlets and smoke detectors, perfect camouflage in a modern building. I installed them in the study, the living room, and Clarissa's bedroom, each one capable of recording audio and transmitting it to a receiver I'd hidden in the abandoned farmhouse. The study was where I hit the jackpot. Lenore had set up what looked like a war room, with files and photographs covering every surface. I recognized some of the faces from Shaggy's investigation, the men who'd been destroyed by the Evers women over the years. But there were new faces too, including a photo of a wealthy rancher from Missoula and detailed financial records showing his assets. The next target, apparently. I photographed everything with a camera Webb had provided, working quickly but carefully. If they discovered the surveillance devices, the whole operation would be blown. As I was finishing up, I heard voices in the hallway outside. My blood turned to ice. They were supposed to be in Billings for hours. I grabbed my equipment and headed for the service door, but the voices were getting closer. There was nowhere to hide except the master bedroom closet surrounded by Clarissa's expensive clothes that still carried her perfume. The front door opened, and I heard Clarissa's voice. "I'm telling you, Mother, he's up to something. Scott said he was asking questions about other men." "Let him ask," Lenore replied. "No one will believe him. We've been too careful, have we? Because if he has evidence, he has nothing. Your father tried the same thing 25 years ago, and look how that turned out." They were in the living room now, their voices carrying clearly through the penthouse's open floor plan. I pressed myself deeper into the closet and prayed they wouldn't come into the bedroom. "Scott's getting nervous," Clarissa said. What if he talks?" "Scott's an idiot. He knows just enough to be useful and not enough to be dangerous." Lenore's voice was cold, calculating. "But if he becomes a problem, we'll handle him the same way we've handled all the others." "What do you mean?" "I mean accidents happen, dear. Men like Scott are expendable." Jesus Christ, they were talking about homicide. "I don't want anyone getting hurt," Clarissa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No one will get hurt if they mind their own business. But if your ex-husband keeps digging, we might have to take more direct action." I held my breath, recording every word on the device Webb had given me. This was exactly what we needed, evidence of criminal intent. "What about the children?" Clarissa asked. "What about them? Lila's already on our side, and Nathan's too young to matter. Once we're finished with Jimmy, we'll move to Missoula and start fresh with the rancher." They talked for another 20 minutes, discussing their plans in detail. The rancher's name was David Morrison, no relation to the judge, and he was worth $30 million. They'd been setting him up for months, with Clarissa playing the role of a lonely divorce lawyer looking for love. When they finally left, I waited another hour before emerging from the closet. My legs were cramped and my shirt was soaked with sweat, but I had what I came for. The recordings were pure gold. Not only did they prove the Evers women were running a long-term con, but they also contained explicit threats against me and Scott. Webb would be able to use this evidence to file criminal charges. But first, I had a more immediate problem to deal with. Scott called me that evening, his voice shaky with fear. "Jimmy, We need to meet. Tonight. What's wrong? I can't talk about it over the phone. Meet me at the Outlaw in an hour. I found him at a corner table, nursing a beer with hands that trembled slightly. The cocky real estate broker was gone, replaced by a scared man who'd finally realized he was in over his head. They're going to end me, he said without preamble. Who's going to end you? Clarissa and her mother. I heard them talking. He took a shaky sip of beer. They think I'm a liability. What did you hear? Enough! Jesus, Jimmy. I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought Clarissa was just an unhappy wife looking for some excitement. She's a lot more than that. Scott leaned forward. They've done this before, haven't they? To other men? I nodded. Many times. And now they're planning to do it to some rancher in Missoula? David Morrison. Worth $30 million. Scott put his head in his hands. I'm so screwed. Maybe not. I pulled out a business card. This is a lawyer in Billings. He specializes in cases like this. If you're willing to testify against them, he might be able to cut you a deal. What kind of deal? Immunity from prosecution in exchange for your cooperation. Scott looked up at me with something like hope in his eyes. You'd do that? After everything? Scott, you're an idiot and an a-hole, but you don't deserve to die for it. I stood up. Call Webb tomorrow morning. Tell him everything you know. What about you? What are you going to do? I smiled, and it felt like the first genuine expression I'd worn in months. I'm going to finish what my father started. The next morning, I called Webb and played him the recordings from the penthouse. His reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Jesus Christ, Jimmy, this is enough to put them away for 20 years. What's our next move? We go to the FBI. This crosses state lines, which makes it federal. And with Scott's testimony, we'll have enough to arrest them before they can hurt anyone else. But I had a different idea. What if we let them make the first move? What do you mean? I mean, what if we give them enough rope to hang themselves? Let them think they're winning right up until the moment we destroy them? Webb was quiet for a long moment. That's dangerous, Jimmy. If they're willing to end Scott, they might be willing to end you too. Then we better make sure we get them first. The plan we hatched was simple in concept, but required perfect timing. Webb would coordinate with the FBI to have agents in position, while I would provoke Clarissa and Lenore into making their move. Scott would wear a wire and try to get them to incriminate themselves further. The provocation came in the form of a letter I had delivered to the penthouse by courier. Clarissa, I know everything. The other men, the shell companies, the bribes to court officials. I have recordings, photographs, and documents that will put you and your mother in prison for the rest of your lives. Meet me at the farmhouse tomorrow night at 9 p.m. if you want to make a deal. Come alone, or I go to the FBI. Jimmy. Of course, I had no intention of making a deal, but I needed them to come to me, on my territory, where Webb's people could document everything. The next day crawled by like a wounded animal. I spent the morning checking and rechecking the surveillance equipment, making sure every camera and microphone was working perfectly. The FBI agents were positioned in the woods around the farmhouse, invisible but ready to move at a moment's notice. Scott called me around noon, his voice tight with fear. They want me to come with them tonight. What did you tell them? That I'd do whatever they wanted. But Jimmy, I don't think I can go through with this. You can and you will. Just remember, the wire is recording everything. The more they say, the longer they go to prison. What if they search me? What if they find the wire? Then you better hope the FBI moves fast. At 8:30 p.m., I took my position in the farmhouse's front room, watching the driveway through a gap in the curtains. The place looked abandoned from the outside, exactly the image I wanted to project. They arrived at exactly 9 p.m. in Lenore's black Mercedes. Clarissa got out first, looking around nervously. She was dressed in all black, like she was going to a funeral. Maybe she was. Lenore emerged from the driver's side with the confidence of a woman who'd never lost a battle. Even at 62, she moved like a predator, all grace and deadly intent. Scott got out last, his face pale in the moonlight. He was wearing the wire, and I could only hope his nerve would hold. I opened the front door before they could knock. Clarissa, Lenore, Scott. I nodded to each of them. Thanks for coming. Cut the crap, Jimmy, Lenore said, pushing past me into the house. What do you want? I want what you took from me, and from my father, and from all the others. Clarissa followed her mother inside, her eyes scanning the room for threats. We didn't take anything from you that you didn't deserve to lose. Is that what you tell yourself, that all those men deserved it? Men are weak, Lenore said, settling into my father's old armchair like a queen taking her throne. They let their desires do their thinking and then they act surprised when smarter people take advantage of them. People like you? People like us. She gestured to Clarissa. We provide a service, Jimmy. We separate fools from their money. If we didn't do it, someone else would. Scott was standing near the door, sweating despite the cool evening air. I could see the outline of the wire transmitter under his shirt, and I prayed Lenore wouldn't notice. So what's this deal you mentioned? Clarissa asked. Simple. You give me back half of what you stole, and I don't go to the FBI with the evidence I have. Lenore laughed, a sound like breaking glass. What evidence? You have nothing. I pulled out a manila folder and spread its contents across the coffee table. Bank records, photographs, transcripts of recorded conversations, enough to paint a clear picture of their operation. Lenore's laughter died as she examined the documents. Where did you get these? Does it matter? The question is, what are you willing to pay to make them disappear? Nothing, Clarissa said, but her voice lacked conviction. These prove nothing. They prove you've been running a con for 30 years. They prove you bribed court officials. They prove you've been planning to homicide Scott and possibly me. Scott flinched at the mention of homicide, and Lenore's eyes narrowed. Homicide? That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. But then you've never let legality stand in your way before. Lenore stood up slowly, her hand moving to her purse. I think we've heard enough. Have you? Because I haven't told you the best part yet. I smiled. I know about David Morrison. The name hit them like a physical blow. Clarissa went white, and Lenore's hand froze on her purse. Who? Clarissa asked, but the game was over. The rancher in Missoula. Your next target, $30 million, recently divorced, looking for love in all the wrong places. I leaned back in my chair. Did you really think you could keep running the same con forever? Lenore's hand came out of her purse, holding a small pistol. I think this conversation is over. Is it? Because I think it's just getting started. The front door burst open and FBI agents flooded into the room. Federal agents! Nobody move! Lenore spun toward the door, raising her tool, but Agent Sarah Collins was faster. The taser hit Lenore, center mass, and she went down hard, the pistol skittering across the floor. Clarissa tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Within seconds, both women were on the floor in handcuffs, their 30-year reign of terror finally over. James Tate? Agent Collins asked. That's me. You did good work here, Mr. Tate. We've been trying to build a case against these two for years. I watched as they led Clarissa and Lenore away. My ex-wife looked back at me once, her face a mask of pure hatred. This isn't over, she snarled. Yeah, I said. It is. Scott was sitting on the front porch, his head in his hands. The agents had already taken his statement and removed the wire. What happens now? He asked. Now you testify, you tell the truth, and maybe you learn to think with your brain instead of your impulses. What about you? I looked out at the valley, at the lights of Glacier Heights twinkling in the distance. Now I rebuild, starting with this place. The trial lasted 3 months. Webb was right, the evidence was overwhelming. Clarissa and Lenore were convicted on multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit homicide. Clarissa got 25 years, Lenore got life. The court ordered the return of all assets obtained through fraud, which meant I got my penthouse back along with most of my money. But I sold the penthouse and used the proceeds to restore the farmhouse. Some things, once broken, are better rebuilt from the ground up. Nate came to live with me after the trial. Lila stayed angry for a while, but eventually she came around. She even apologized, though it took her 2 years to swallow her pride enough to do it. On a warm spring evening, exactly 1 year after the arrests, I was sitting on the farmhouse's front porch when a car pulled into the driveway. It was Agent Collins, but she was out of uniform, wearing jeans and a simple blouse. Mr. Tate, she said, walking up to the porch. Mind if I join you? Call me Jimmy, and please, have a seat. She settled into the chair next to mine, looking out at the valley. Beautiful view. It is now. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Finally, she spoke. You know, in 20 years with the Bureau, I've never seen anything quite like what those women were doing. The scope of it, the planning, the sheer audacity. They were good at what they did, I'll give them that. But you were better. I thought about that. No, I wasn't better. I was just angrier. And I had help from beyond the grave. Your father? My father. He knew he couldn't beat them, but he made sure I could. Agent Collins stood up. Well, I just wanted to stop by and see how you were doing. You went through heck, but you came out the other side. Some days are better than others. That's all any of us can ask for. After she left, I remained on the porch as darkness fell over the valley. In the distance, I could see the lights of Glacier Heights, a town that had watched my fall and my resurrection with equal fascination. Tomorrow, Nate would graduate from high school. Lila was coming home from college for the ceremony. We were going to be a family again, scarred but intact. I thought about Clarissa, sitting in a federal prison cell, probably still convinced she was the victim in all this. I thought about Lenore, dying slowly behind bars. Her empire of manipulation finally crumbled to dust. And I thought about my father, who'd lost everything but had found a way to win in the end. The Tate name meant something in Glacier Heights again. Not what it used to mean, but something new, something harder, something forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the hammer of justice. I was no longer the man who'd walked out of that courtroom broken and defeated. That man had died in the ashes of his old life. The man who remained was something else entirely. Some people called me a hero. Others whispered that I'd become as ruthless as the women who'd destroyed me. Maybe they were both right. All I knew was that when the final gavel fell, when the last appeal was denied, when the prison doors slammed shut on the Evers women forever, I was the one left standing. And that was enough.